Hi everyone! In this video ay pag-uusapan natin ang capital gains taxation. And disclaimer lang ha, etong mga dinidiscuss ko ay based on the book of Sir Rex B. Banggawan. Yung book niya ay Income Taxation, Laws, Principles, and Applications. This video is dedicated to my students and to all other students out there na nahihirapang intindihin yung mga konsepto ng income taxation. This is for you guys. Alright, so hindi na natin patatagalin pa. We'll start right away with our discussion and we'll start it with the classification of taxpayers' properties. So yung properties daw ni taxpayer is classified into two. One is ordinary assets and two is capital assets. Pag sinabi nating ordinary assets, ito yung mga assets or properties ni taxpayer na ginagamit sa business. Halimbawa, stock and trade of a taxpayer or other real property of a kind which would be properly be included in the inventory of the taxpayer if on hand at the close of the taxable year. B. Real property held by the taxpayer primarily for sale to customers in the ordinary course of his trade or business. So, A and B talks about inventory. Yung A is inventory of stocks. Yung B naman is inventory of a real property. Pag sinabi natin real property, these are buildings and lands. And then C, real property used in trade or business of a character which is subject to the allowance for depreciation. And D, real property used in trade or business of the taxpayer. So, C and D both refers to real properties na ginagamit sa business. Okay, uulitin ko ha. A and B, yung tinutukoy nila dito ay inventory. Inventory or paninda. Inventory for stocks for letter A and B, inventory ng real property. C and D, yung tinutukoy nila ay yung real property na ginagamit sa business. So, simply defined, pag sinabi nating ordinary assets, ang tinutukoy niya ay mga assets or properties na held for sale like the inventory and held for use or yung ginagamit sa business like for example, supplies, and then items of property, plant, and equipment like buildings, property improvements, and equipment. The second classification of taxpayers' properties is capital assets. So, ano naman yung capital assets? Sabi dito, any asset other than ordinary assets are called capital assets daw. Okay? So, kapag yung asset ay hindi for sale, hindi rin held for use ng business, ibig sabihin, hindi yun ordinary asset. Ano siya? Capital assets. Basically, capital assets are personal assets and business assets of the taxpayer. Pag sinabi nating personal asset, ibig sabihin nun, it's an asset that is non-business. Meaning to say, hindi related sa business. And then, yung business asset naman, meron siyang dalawang classification. Meron siyang financial assets and intangible assets. Pag sinabi natin financial assets, it's more related to financials like cash, receivables, prepaid expenses, and investments. Yung intangible assets naman, when say intangible, yung untouchable, hindi natin mahawakan. So examples to that are patent, copyrights, leasehold rights, and franchise rights. Analysis of properties held by taxpayers. For individual taxpayers, they usually own personal assets and business assets. The business assets of the individual taxpayers are further classified into ordinary assets and capital assets. For corporate taxpayers, they usually own the ordinary assets and capital assets. Asset classification is relative. That means the classification of assets or properties as ordinary asset or capital asset does not depend upon the nature of the property, but upon the nature of the taxpayer's business and its usage by the business. So, paano ba natin i-classify yung asset as ordinary or capital? Ano ba yung magiging basis? Okay, sabi dito, ang magiging basihan daw sa pag-classify ng asset as either ordinary or capital ay yung nature ng business ni taxpayer at yung usage ng asset dito sa or dun sa business. Okay, para malinaw, di-discuss natin tong examples dito. Okay, we have the first one, stocks. So, yung stocks, it's an ordinary asset on the part of the security dealer. So, sino ba si security dealer? Siya yung nagbebenta ng mga stocks at iba pang securities. Again, nagbebenta ng stocks. So, kung stocks ang pag-uusapan, that is part of the inventory ni security dealer. So, it's an ordinary asset. Kasi, di ba, yung ordinary assets includes assets that are held for sale. Pagka ang nagmamay-ari ng stocks ay isang non-security dealer. Again, non-security dealer. Ibig sabihin, hindi siya nagbebenta ng stocks, hindi siya nagbebenta ng securities. So, anong tawag sa stocks na pinagmamay-ari niya? Ordinary asset or capital asset? It's a capital asset. Kasi hindi naman niya business yung pagbibenta ng stocks. Another example, vacant lot. For a real estate dealer, is it an ordinary asset or a capital asset? It's an ordinary asset. Bakit? Kasi si real estate dealer, it's part of his or her business na magbenta ng lote, magbenta ng lot. Okay, what if yung nagmamay-ari ng vacant lot ay isang security dealer? Ano si lot dito? Ano si vacant lot dito? Is it an ordinary asset or a capital asset? It's a capital asset. Kasi si security dealer, yung business niya ay magbenta ng stocks or securities, hindi yung pagbebenta ng vacant lots. Asset classification rules. So this is something that you really need to know. You really need to remember. You have to memorize or at least familiarize. You have to read this more often para mag-sink in talaga. The first asset classification rule says that a property purchased for future use in business is an ordinary asset even though this purpose is later thwarted or prevented by circumstances beyond the taxpayer's control. So, ibig sabihin daw, yung property na binili na gagamitin sa business in the future ay isang ordinary asset kahit na yung purpose na yun ay hindi matupad-tupad dahil sa mga pangyayari na hindi maiiwasan. B. Discontinuance of the active use of the property does not change its character previously established as a business property. So, yung property na ginagamit sa business ay mananatiling ordinary asset kahit na nahinto ang paggamit nito sa business. Letter C. Real properties being used, or have been previously used in trade of the taxpayer shall be considered ordinary assets. So yung real properties na ginagamit o ginamit sa business ay kabilang sa ordinary assets. Letter D. Properties classified as ordinary assets for being used in business by a taxpayer not engaged in the real estate business are automatically converted to capital assets upon showing of proof that the same have not been used in business for more than 2 years prior to the consummation of the taxable transaction involving such property. Okay, so ano bang ibig sabihin nun? So, yung properties na classified as ordinary assets kasi ginagamit sa business, that's why ordinary assets, ay makakonvert into capital assets kapag si taxpayer makapagpakita ng proof na itong mga properties na ito ay hindi na ginagamit sa business for more than 2 years. Yun kung si taxpayer ay hindi engaged sa real estate business. Dahil kapag si taxpayer ay engaged sa real estate business, yung properties na yun will still be ordinary assets kahit hindi na ginagamit sa business. Letter E, a depreciable asset is an ordinary asset even if it is fully depreciated or there is a failure to take depreciation during the period of ownership. So, kahit fully depreciated na daw yung asset, or kung may failure man to recognize the depreciation during the period of ownership, that asset will still be an ordinary asset. Letter F, real properties used by an exempt corporation and its exempt operations are considered capital assets. Kasi first and foremost, yung mga exempt corporations are not considered as business. And then letter G, the classification of property transferred by sale, barter, or exchange, inheritance, donation, or declaration of property dividend shall depend on whether or not the acquirer uses it in business. Okay, depende sa nag-acquire ng property from sale, donation, exchange, inheritance, declaration of property dividend. So, depende sa acquirer kung gagamitin niya for business. So, that will be ordinary asset. Kung hindi naman, that will be capital asset. Letter H, for real property subject of involuntary transfer such as expropriation and foreclosure sale, the involuntariness of such sale shall have no effect on the classification of such real property. And then letter I, change in business from real estate to non-real estate business shall not change the classification of ordinary assets that are previously held. Alright, so at this point, we're going to apply the rules that we previously tackled through the following illustrations. Here's the first one. Mr. Alfonso has a building which was previously used as an office and is subject to a periodic allowance for depreciation. In July 1, 2015, Mr. Alfonso implemented a strategic shift in his business operations, resulting to the relocation of administrative office in another city and the resultant abandonment of his office. So, sabi dito, si Mr. Alfonso daw, meron siyang building na ginagamit as office ng kanyang business. Kaya nga lang, on July 1, 2015, meron siyang in-implement na pagbabago sa business niya. And because of that, kinakailangan na i-transfer yung office niya sa other city. So, na-abandon ngayon yung building. Okay, so here's now the question under case number 1. What if Mr. Alfonso is not engaged in real estate business? How are we going to classify the abandoned building? Okay, so check natin yung asset classification rules. So, saan kaya dito yung applicable? That would be letter D. Kasi sabi dito, properties classified as ordinary assets for being used in business by a taxpayer not engaged in the real estate business are automatically converted to capital assets upon showing of proof that the same have not been used in business for more than 2 years prior to the consummation of the taxable transaction involving such property. Okay, so from July 1, 2015 to July 1, 2016, that is 1 year. From July 1, 2016 to July 1, 2017, that is 2 years. Ano yung sabi sa asset classification rule, letter D? Dapat more than 2 years daw na hindi ginagamit yung building. Okay, so let's add 1 day to July 1, 2017. Okay, that makes it July 2, 2017. So that is more than 2 years already, di ba? 2 years and 1 day to be exact. Okay, so pwede na. And so, effective on July 2, 2017, pwede nang i-reclassify yung abandoned building from ordinary asset to capital asset. So, magiging capital asset na siya. Pero merong condition to that ha. Dapat makapag-submit si Mr. Alfonso ng proof na yung building na yun ay abandoned nga talaga at hindi na ginagamit for more than 2 years ng business. Now, what if Mr. Alfonso is engaged in real estate business? So, paano natin i-classify yung abandoned building? Okay, so ano kaya yung applicable na asset classification rule dito? It would be this one, letter B. Discontinuance of the active use of the property does not change its character previously established as a business property. So, kung si Mr. Alfonso ay engaged in real estate business, yung abandoned building niya na ginagamit previously sa kanyang business ay mananatiling ordinary asset kahit sabihin pa nating abandoned or hindi na ginagamit. Another illustration. On June 1, 2014, Mr. Alfonso purchased a building to be used as a branch sales office. The building remained idle as of December 31, 2017 due to an ongoing civil war. Okay, so on June 1, 2014, bumili daw si Mr. Alfonso ng building na gagamitin as branch sales office. Pero nagkaroon ng civil war kaya hindi ito nagamit hanggang December 31, 2017. Okay. So, case number 1. If Mr. Alfonso is not engaged in real estate business, how are we going to classify the building? So, check natin yung asset classification rules. Tingnan natin kung saan doon ang applicable. Alright, so the applicable rule would be letter A. Sabi dito sa letter A property na binili daw for future use in business ay isang ordinary asset kahit na yung purpose na yun ay na-prevent dahil sa mga circumstances beyond the taxpayer's control. Okay, so balikan natin yung problem or yung illustration. Sabi dito, si Mr. Alfonso bumili daw ng building na gagamitin as a branch sales office or in short, gagamitin sa business. Pero as of December 31, 2017, yung building ay hindi pa rin nagamit kasi merong ongoing na civil war. So, yung civil war ba within the control of the taxpayer? Of course, hindi, no? Beyond the control of the taxpayer yan. So, pasok siya sa asset classification rule letter A. So, if we're going to go back to the question, how are we going to classify the building if Mr. Alfonso is not engaged in real estate business? Our answer is the building will remain as ordinary asset because according to asset classification rule letter A, the building or the property purchased for future use in business, even though this is later thwarted by circumstances beyond the control of the taxpayer, it does not lose its character as an ordinary asset. Alright, so we have here another illustration and it says that Juan, a realty dealer, donated one of his house and lot inventory to his son as dowry for his upcoming marriage. His son shall use the same as his family residence. He also donated another house and lot as initial capital of his daughter who will commence a realty leasing business. Okay? So, dalawa yung binigay ni Juan na house and lot. Yung isa para sa kanyang anak na lalaki na gagamitin daw as family residence. Tapos yung isang house and lot ay para sa kanyang anak na babae as initial capital kasi yung anak niyang babae ay magsisimula ng realty leasing business. Okay, so how are we going to classify the house and lot given by Juan to his son, and paano naman natin i-classify yung house and lot na binigay ni Juan sa kanyang anak na babae? And so, what is the applicable asset classification rule for this? That would be letter G. Sabi dito, the classification of property transferred by sale, barter, or exchange, inheritance, donation, or declaration of property dividends shall depend on whether or not the acquirer uses it in business. So, depende sa nakatanggap ng property kung gagamitin ba niya sa business. Kung gagamitin niya sa business, edi ordinary asset yun. Pag hindi, capital asset. Okay, balikan natin yung illustration. Ang sabi dito, ang house and lot na binigay ni Juan sa kanyang anak na lalaki ay gagamitin as family residence. So therefore, yung house and lot na yon ay capital asset sa anak na lalaki ni Juan. Now, for the house and lot na binigay niya sa kanyang anak na babae, ang sabi dito, gagamitin daw as initial capital dahil yung anak niyang babae ay magsisimula ng kanyang realty leasing business. Okay, so in short, gagamitin yung house and lot sa kanyang business. So that house and lot is an ordinary asset sa anak ni Juan na babae. Another illustration, Bantay Bata Foundation owns building A1 which it uses for its non-profit operations, and also it owns another building which is building A2 which it lists out to various commercial leases. So how are we going to classify the building A1? And then how are we going to classify the building A2? So, yung building A1 kasi ginagamit siya for non-profit operations. So, therefore, it is a capital asset. 'Di ba? Dahil sabi dito sa rule, asset classification na rule, letter F, yung real properties daw na ginagamit sa exempt corporation para sa exempt din na operation are considered capital assets. So, Bantay Bata Foundation is an exempt corporation. Tapos sabi, 'di ba, gagamitin sa kanyang non-profit operations. So, therefore, yung building na A1 ay capital asset. For building A2, since ginagamit to for commercial purposes, which is business purposes. So, etong building A2 is an ordinary asset. Please take note, class, ha, that although Bantay Bata Foundation is a non-profit entity, but the fact that nag-e-engage siya sa profit-oriented or commercial activity dahil dito sa building A2, di ba, pinarentahan niya? So, therefore, yung income coming from that rent is taxable.